Order.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for inviting me to be here today. Before I begin, I just wanted to share a few of my words. I'd like to welcome you all. Welcome our visitors here as well. It's all good to see you all. I know all you, most of you personally. It's an honor to see you again. You know, when we come together and we work to help our people, we're in a field of helping each another. For us to help each other, to help other people, we need to help ourselves. I see you work together, regular MLAs, ministers, staff, in order for us to do well for ourselves and our people. We need to listen to one another, to have respect for each other while we're sitting here. When somebody is speaking, like the elders always said to me, when they're speaking, you listen. Well, they may not be talking directly to you, but the messages that we hear could be useful for us somewhere down the road. I ask that you be respectful of the land that we're on today, in Dragis territory, people in the Yellowknife. We have respect for these people here. We take care of this place while we're visiting from our own regions, our own communities. I ask you to look after that place. Look after each other while you're working here. Show respect. Honor each other, like we do our families. Inside here, you're like a family. I just wanted to share that. I'd like to offer you a prayer today. Creator, we thank you for this wonderful day. Creator, today we ask you to be a part of our lives today, this moment and this time. I ask you, Creator, to bless this place of decision-making, this very place where our people come together to talk about our people. I ask you, God, we ask that you bless each and every one of these members of the legislative assemblies, the regular MLAs, our ministers, Creator, our speaker, our staff that work here. Each and every one of these people that work in this place, God, we ask you to bless them. Give them the strength each day as they come here to feel good about the work that they do. To feel good when they leave here at the end of the day, God, that we ask you to bless them. Guide them and strengthen them. I know, God, that when we're away from our home and our communities, it's difficult to be away, even for the day. The amount of time we spend here, God, that we ask you to look after our families back home. Take care of them. Watch over them. Take care of our homes. Bless our homes. Keep it from any harm or danger, God, while our leaders are away from their communities. God, we ask you to bless this place again, to look after each and every one of these people. We ask you to bless our people at home, our communities, the people that we work for. Take care of those that are sick at home and in the hospitals. We think about those that are struggling on the streets today, Gogwadat. We ask you to bless them. Take care of their health. Watch them. Watch over them, Gogwadat. Creator, we ask you just to help our brothers and sisters here today in the Assembly that they have a good session. The third session of the 18th Legislative Assembly, Gogwadat. We ask you to bless each and every one of these people as they listen to one another. Make good decisions for our people out there today. Oh, Shuluknai, 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 Shuluknai. I'd like to offer you a flute song. This song I haven't played yet. I don't know what it is. But what I feel in here today is really strong energy. An energy that we want to get something done. There's a lot on our minds and a lot in our heart. I want to put this song in your heart. I want to leave a song in here for you to help you guide you in all that you do today.
Please be seated. Good afternoon, members. Members, 第十三届空中开中。
On behalf of the Assembly, I'd like to thank the Elder William Greenland for joining us today and leading us in prayer. Let's see. I would also like to thank the pages we will have with us throughout this setting. We have students from East 3 School in Inuvik, Eco Boreal School in Hay River, from Palatak Angig School are also here with us, and Chief Jimmy Bruno School in Betchako. Also in Etse School in Delaney. The pages are with us today. Also from Fort Smith, Paul W. Kaiser School. Also in Yellowknife here from Sir John Franklin High School. They are here for the session. Welcome and thank you to all the pages that will be with us during this setting. One day these young people will be our leaders in the future. They are the future of this great territory. Please join me in thanking them and welcoming them to the Assembly. Our official languages are an important reflection of the culture and heritage of the Northwest Territories. Throughout the country and around the globe, Indigenous and minority languages are languishing and need to be preserved and celebrated. This is best done through the use of our languages. I am pleased to advise members of this House and the public that throughout this setting we will be providing interpretation in the following languages: Tlinchon, South Slavey, Chippewan, and French. Members, please remember to leave your dial on channel 2 for English. I encourage everyone to use and develop your language skills to preserve and strengthen all of our official languages. Colleagues, it is my pleasure to welcome you all back to the chamber to resume the third session of the 18th Legislative Assembly. Colleagues, autumn is upon us, and winter is just around the corner. Too soon, some might say. I know that your summers were busy with work in our constituency, work in your committees, and the ongoing work of government. Although we lead busy lives, I hope you were also able to find time for family, close friends, and yourselves. With our summer behind us, it is time to look forward to the challenges and opportunities that lie before us as individuals and collectively as members of the 18th Legislative Assembly. As we enter the final year of this Assembly, it is of the utmost importance that we consider why we are here. We were elected to represent and serve our constituents and all people of this territory. We can only achieve this if we continue to work together, showing respect for this House, each other, and ourselves. That is not to suggest that we will not have disagreements. We will, but we must be respectful and professional when we have these disagreements. This respect and professionalism is in keeping with the rules of our Legislative Assembly and our form of consensus government, and in keeping with the expectation of the people who elected us. And now, I wish to advise the House that I have received the following messages from the Commissioner of the Northwest Territories. It reads, Dear Mr. Speaker, I wish to advise that I recommend to the Legislative Assembly of the Northwest Territories the passage of Appropriation Act, Infrastructure Expenditures 2019-2020, Supplementary Appropriation Act, Infrastructure Expenditure Number 3, 2018 to 2019, and Supplementary Appropriation Act, Operation Expenditure number 3, 2018-2019. During the third session of the 18th Assembly, yours truly, Margaret M. Tom, Commissioner. Merci, colleagues. Orders of the day.
The Honorable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to welcome my colleagues back to the Legislative Assembly for the continuation of the third session. This will be a very active sitting for us as we continue making important decisions to create a strong future for the Northwest Territories. With 1 year left in our term, we are getting into the home stretch for the 18th Legislative Assembly. At the beginning of this Legislative Assembly, all members agreed to adopt an ambitious mandate based on our shared priorities. Our plan, the first of its kind produced by the Government of the Northwest Territories, included over 200 specific commitments that the government would undertake over its complete 4-year term to advance the priorities of the Legislative Assembly. Following a review of our progress and some amendments, the mandate of the Government of the Northwest Territories now includes 233 commitments. To date, we have completed 104 of those commitments. We have made good progress in our commitments, Mr. Speaker, and as we enter into the final year of the 18th Legislative Assembly, the Government of the Northwest Territories expects to complete many more. Engaging with the Government of Canada is an important part of how our government is fulfilling even after devolution. The federal government has substantial responsibilities in the Northwest Territories and an important role to play in working with Northerners to create sustainable social and economic development. That is why the Government of the Northwest Territories has been working hard to ensure that Canada understands the needs and priorities of Northerners and the potential impacts of their decisions and policies on the North. Our efforts have included clearly making the case for Northwest Territories priorities like Tolston expansion, investment in transportation infrastructure, and assistance in getting our communities off diesel, and our direct contacts with the federal government and in the media through vehicles like the Red Alert. We have also taken advantage of opportunities to engage with parliamentary committees to ensure parliamentarians in all parties understand what makes the North unique and its unique priorities. That has included presentations by our government to the Senate Committee on the Arctic and the Senate Committee on Aboriginal Peoples last month, and a meeting with the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development last week. That work to raise the profile of the Northwest Territories and get our priorities on the federal government's radar is starting to pay dividends. At the end of June, our government and the Government of Canada announced a joint $140 million investment in the Mackenzie Valley Highway, including the construction of the Great Bear River Bridge and the construction of an access road from Wrigley to Mount Gaudette. These are important projects for the Satu and Decho regions that will help support further economic development and advance our vision of connecting communities down the valley. Just this morning, Minister Wally Schuman and Federal Minister of Environment and Climate Change, Catherine McKenna, announced the approval of funding under the Federal Low Carbon Economy Fund for several Northwest Territories projects. Approval of these projects is an important part of fulfilling Canada's commitment to help the Northwest Territories implement the Pan-Canadian Framework on Climate Change and will improve energy security for our residents, stabilize the cost of living, and address the impacts of climate change. Another positive step was the announcement by Federal Minister of Intergovernmental and Northern Affairs, Dominique LeBlanc, and Minister of Natural Resources, Amarjit Suhi, of a path forward on Arctic offshore oil and gas development last week. Resource development has been and will continue to be a significant sector of the Northwest Territories economy, responsible for providing jobs and prosperity for our people. It has been no secret that the oil and gas sector has struggled in recent years, and that has had a negative impact on the people of the Beaufort Delta and Sawtooth regions in particular. The news that Canada is prepared to move ahead with a science-based review of their indefinite moratorium on Arctic oil and gas development, and that the government of the Northwest Territories will have a role in that review, is an important step in the right direction for the territorial economy and a signal that Canada has heard the message that Northerners must be involved in making decisions about the North. We are also pleased that Canada has announced it will take steps to fulfill its commitment in the devolution agreement to negotiate co-management of offshore oil and gas development with our government, the Inuvialuit Regional Corporation, and the Government of Yukon. These two commitments, along with the resumption of production in Norman Wells, following the completion of repairs to the Enbridge Line 21 pipeline, are positive developments for the Northwest Territories economy, and we are pleased to see movement in this important sector again. While these developments are welcome, the Government of the Northwest Territories understands that promoting the long-term economic and social development of the territory needs to take a broad view that includes multiple sectors. It is also going to take a practical plan that will help focus efforts and investments into those sectors and projects that can create the greatest sustainable benefit for our people. Mr. Speaker, to be successful, that plan has to reflect the broadly held priorities of all Northerners, including the Government of the Northwest Territories and Indigenous governments. It will also have to be a shared plan that all our governments are committed to following and implementing. At the beginning of last week, I invited leaders from all the Indigenous governments and their economic development arms to meet with Ministers Robert C. MacLeod, Wally Schuman, and myself for an in-depth discussion about the future of the Northwest Territories economy. Over 2.5 days, we had some frank discussions about how we can work together to promote the economic development of the whole territory, not just our individual regions. We took a hard look at the challenges we face, including those we sometimes create for ourselves, and at the opportunities for economic development we think we can realistically pursue. At the end of our discussions, leaders agreed that we need to take immediate steps to address the economic challenges the Northwest Territories faces in order to ensure a sustainable future for the North and its residents. Leaders also agreed that large-scale investment in northern energy, transportation, and communications infrastructure corridors is key to creating investment and economic opportunities in all sectors. Our goal remains to create a prosperous, sustainable future built on the foundation of a strong, diversified economy, which consists of traditional sectors like tourism, agriculture, harvesting, cultural arts, and fishing, but also recognizes the large role that non-renewable sectors like mining and oil and gas have and will continue to play in our territory. At the end of the symposium, leaders agreed to consider establishing a working group with representatives from the Indigenous governments and the Government of the Northwest Territories to identify economic opportunities and concrete next steps that we can take together to ensure a sustainable and prosperous future for all Northwest Territories residents. I have always said that partnership is an essential feature of how we do business here in the Northwest Territories. And I want to thank all the participants at last week's symposium for coming to the table with their ideas and a willingness to look for solutions. I look forward to continuing our work together in the coming months. Identifying the shared economic priorities of our government and Indigenous governments will help us create consensus we need to move forward as a territory. It will also help our government as we continue to work with the federal government on completing an Arctic policy framework that will set out federal priorities and spending commitments for social and economic development in the North. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I do want to note that during this sitting, we will be debating the Government of the Northwest Territories Infrastructure Acquisition Plan for 2019-2020. Our government's capital budget is a significant investment in our communities and in the future of the territory, and this year we will be tabling the biggest capital plan we have ever proposed. We often hear about the need for spending on transportation infrastructure, and it is true that is a priority for this government, partly because we're able to leverage substantial federal funding for these projects with a comparatively small investment of territorial money. We should not, though, let those projects overshadow the many smaller but equally important projects in our communities that provide housing for our residents, schools, and health facilities. Mr. Speaker, as an example of this investment, in the past few months, we have been able to open the Woodland Manor extension in Hay River and new health and social services centres in Norman Wells and Fort Resolution. Other health infrastructure projects are on the horizon, including the completion of the new Stanton Territorial Hospital. I look forward to discussing our proposed infrastructure budget with members during this upcoming sitting, Mr. Speaker, and continuing to work with them to fulfill our commitments to create a strong future for all residents. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Colleagues, I'd like to draw your attention to the people in the gallery. We have here with us, I'm pleased to recognize His Excellency Vikas Swarup, High Commissioner of India to Canada, and his wife, Mrs. Aparna Swarup, here with us. Both join us here today from the Embassy of India in Ottawa. Welcome to our North, welcome to our Assembly. Merci. And of course, our very own Carmen Moore. Merci for doing all the excellent work. Minister statement. Minister ik good down in the Minister of Status of Women.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to acknowledge the International Day of the Girl Child. Plan International Canada, with all party support from the Canadian Parliament, led global efforts to recognize this day. Their actions resulted in October 11th being recognized by the United Nations for the first time in 2012 as a day to champion the empowerment and rights of girls around the world. This is a powerful accomplishment, and I am extremely proud of our country's leadership in this effort. The Right Honourable Justin Trudeau, our Prime Minister, put action behind the words and gave us Canada's first cabinet with an equal number of men and women. Our Prime Minister took the lead in this, and as elected members, we also need to stand and show our commitment. Mr. Speaker, members of the Canadian Parliament did not let party differences hinder their support for establishing this day. In a show of cooperation and serving as tremendous examples, they stood united in support of girls everywhere. Similarly, we, as elected members within our consensus government, must stand together united in our support to improve the circumstances of girls in the Northwest Territories and beyond. Mr. Speaker, do not get me wrong. I am not asking members to give up their seats. I believe in allowing the people to vote for the member that they feel best represents them. What I am asking is that each member show our support by working to empower girls, by questioning why certain situations impact girls more than others, by continuously looking at ways to break down barriers. Mr. Speaker, with our support shown by standing firm beside them and lifting as many barriers as we can within our power, we will all make a difference in the empowerment of girls and equality of humankind. I invite each member of the Legislative Assembly to join me in recognizing the International Day of the Girl Child. Message out, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Minister statements. Minister statements. Member statements. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as the Premier noted, we heard the Federal Minister of Environment and Climate Change, Catherine McKenna, this morning announce a new funding from the Government of Canada's Low Carbon Economy Leadership Fund. That was a very welcomed announcement, and it will go a long way in helping residents and businesses adapt to our changing environment. So it is fitting today to speak about the urgency of responding to climate change. Climate change presents an existential threat. It causes more chaos and disruption, costs more billions and more lives every year. We humans have been taking resources out of our environment while pumping pollution back in. Our ecosystem has been irreversibly changed, and as we know, climate change knows no borders. And it's urgent to move, Mr. Speaker. Last weekend, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change issued a dire warning to the world. We have just 12 years to make significant changes in our carbon production that causes climate change or face dire consequences. The IPCC report says a 2-degree average rise in global temperature will cause extreme heat waves, wildfires, flooding, drought, sea level rise, and extensive poverty. Does this sound familiar? It says every 1/10 of a degree is a choice between life or death, but it's possible to slow this trend and limit temperature rise if we make tough decisions and take decisive action now. Mr. Speaker, the report emphasizes that the wheels of irreversible damage are turning fast. Climate change is a reality, and the world's scientific community agrees. Human activities are a primary cause. Here in the North, we are rapidly approaching a number of tipping points. Even if we stopped emitting carbon by 100% tomorrow, it would not reverse the warming trend and avoid the impacts that come with thawing permafrost, melting ice caps, eroding shorelines, increasing winds, massive forest fires, and dissipating water levels that we currently experience. Lastly, Mr. Speaker, I am more than pleased to see this government develop the 2030 N.W.T. Climate Change Strategic Framework, and I commend them for that. It calls for action to reduce our use of fossil fuels, broaden our knowledge and awareness, and build resilience and adaptation. For our sake and future generations, action can't come soon enough. At the appropriate time, I'll have questions for the Minister of ENR. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Member statement. Member Ika Godan and then Member Frame Lake.
Monsieur le Président, here's my annual What I Did for My Summer Holidays report. Right after our last sitting, my wife and I went for a 4-week holiday to Ireland to visit family and take in the Wild West. Ireland has a vibrant economy that does not rely on non-renewable resources. Tourism is booming in Ireland. On July 12th, the Oireachtas, or Irish Parliament, passed a law to sell off its investments in fossil fuels. I'm proud to be an Irish as well as a Canadian citizen and wish our cabinet was as forward-thinking. It was very hot in Ireland while the N.W.T was drowning in rain. I know the Finance and Environment Minister was chalking up the money saved on forest fighting and urged him to reinvest it in renewable energy and economic diversification. In August, MLAs met for a caucus retreat at Lacklamart Adventures Lodge. We shared our individual summer activities, how to improve consensus government, and our work at the Assembly. There was discussion around increasing the participation of women in the Assembly and our transition to the next Assembly as well. Many thanks to Lacklamart Adventures and to the youth and elders who visit us from N.W.T. For the 3rd year, I hand-delivered newsletters throughout the Frame Lake riding, and it's very helpful to meet many of my constituents at the door. Issues raised included the need for more investment into renewable and alternative energy and how this should be coordinated with carbon pricing, our limited capacity for climate change research and planning, the slow pace of land use planning, economic diversification for life after diamonds, more work needed to be done to lower the cost of housing, barriers to employment from the cost and complexity of getting federal pardons, need for greater efficiency in government and investment into longer-term cost-saving measures, for example, early childhood development, and opportunities for further development of a knowledge economy with post-secondary education. I look forward to raising these issues again as part of our sitting and to having them addressed in the 2019-20 budget. Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Member statement. Member Ike Goodine and then Member Cam Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. As the 18th Legislative Assembly enters the final year of its term, it's important to take stock of the state of affairs here in the Northwest Territories and the well-being of the peoples who elected us to serve them as decision-makers and representatives. Since taking office in 2015, the public has been led to believe by the Premier and Cabinet that the N.W.T is securely on the right path to a prosperous future. N.W.T press releases and ministerial talking points repeatedly insist that our fortunes continue to grow, despite significant evidence to the contrary. Following current trends and measures, real economic growth is forecast to fall almost every year well into the 2030s. Unemployment is set to rise in the N.W.T, while wages are not expected to keep pace with inflation over the same period. As more and more Northerners move elsewhere to live and work, many homeowners are concerned as to the security of their investments and savings locked away in their homes. Average working families are increasingly unable to make ends meet, and according to a report on N.W.T food insecurity and poverty, more and more families are becoming resilient on food donations. The rates of police-reported crime and the crime severity index have reached record highs. In fact, we are #1, Mr. Speaker, in Canada, according to the most recent statistics released in 2017. Despite these hard facts, the leadership of this government continues to dodge questions and avoid taking responsibility for the very real problems that demand real solutions. For example, recent media reporting on poverty in the N.W.T pressed a minister of this government on the aforementioned statistics, and the report was an all too familiar referencing of strategies, partnerships, and the need to see data over time. Mr. Speaker, the data the minister referred to is readily available through the poverty indicators from the N.W.T Bureau of Statistics, going all the way back to 1985. Income assistance cases have increased 23% from 2009 to 2016. Mr. Speaker, there is sufficient data, and yet we're hearing the same delay tactics that we've always heard. According to our recent business plan reviews, only 37% of mandate commitments can be considered substantially complete, with one department having 0 mandate commitments after 3 years into our term. This government cannot continue to dodge questions and avoid responsibility when decisive leadership is required to meet the challenges of today and lead us into a stronger and more secure future. Mr. Speaker, I will have questions for the Premier about his leadership over this government. Thank you.
Merci. Member statement. Member Ike Goodine and the Member YELLOWKNIFE Centre.
Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, today I rise to celebrate National Coming Out Day. In fact, today is the 30th anniversary of National Coming Out Day, which began with the March on Washington by gays and lesbians demanding equal rights. Mr. Speaker, coming out as gay or lesbian, transgender or two-spirited, queer or bisexual is an important way to assert one's identity, to live freely and openly, and to seek support from allies. It's a milestone for every person who has ever done it, and the reaction of family and friends is a topic of conversation forever after. Mr. Speaker, the reason I speak of this today, the reason there is an Awareness Day, is that there is still discrimination that must be challenged and support offered to those who come out now. I came out about 20 years ago. It took me a while to get there. I didn't have any role models that I knew of in my family, none in my peer group at school, and few in the public eye except for Ellen DeGeneres, who had come out the year before. Living openly as a gay person in a small town in Labrador was daunting, but hiding seemed worse. I started by telling friends, and after getting a positive reception from them, I slowly moved on to my family. Nobody freaked out. It's also fair to say that not everyone was excited by the prospect. They feared I would face discrimination and bullying, as well as limits on my opportunities. The prevailing advice was to keep this news to ourselves. Mr. Speaker, when I arrived in Yellowknife in the spring of 2000, I connected with a queer support and advocacy group called Out North. There, for the first time in my life, I felt a sense of community and full acceptance. This was the time when gays and lesbians were lobbying government for equality rights, including the protection of sexual identity in the Human Rights Act, the right to adopt children, and the right to marry. It wasn't an easy journey, but we slowly, primarily through court action, got the rights we needed, wanted, and deserved. I'd like to think the coming out journey is easier for young people today. In Yellowknife, they have the Rainbow Youth Centre, a safe place to spend time, participate in programs, and use the centre's resources. Schools are now more welcoming with gay straight alliances or similar groups for queer youth to connect with. One of the most important changes in the last 20 years is the emergence of role models who came out, live openly, and advocate publicly for equality and acceptance. Here in the N.W.T.
Member Yellowknife Center,
Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to conclude my statement.
Member Member Yellowknife Center, you may conclude your statement.
Here in the N.W.T, there are role models in every area of our community, including me. I'm here today to say, come out when you're ready. There are lots of us here to support you in living your best and happiest life. Merci.
Merci. Member statement. Member, you can go down and the member Nahende.
Mr. Speaker, today's statement is a gentle reminder of why we serve and to whom we serve as privileged members of this, the 18th Legislative Assembly. Each of us in this Assembly have been entrusted with a grave responsibility accountable to our individual constituents, the ones that voted each of us into our respective and privileged and humbled positions to serve all Northerners. The positions of MLAs, Cabinet Ministers, Speaker of the House and Premier reach far beyond our constituents. We also serve each other. Yet, let us not forget the most important one to whom we are ultimately responsible and accountable for, the Lord, our Creator, to serve with our personal dignity, compassion, kindness, ethical professionalism, as well as gentle mindfulness and humility and dedication. We each need to be reminded of this because of the frailty of our human nature and the very essence of what it is meant to be human. We each struggle and are challenged with personal and professional dilemmas. However, let us not allow these struggles to define our character. Instead, how we rise above them and resolve them to be the mark we strive for, collectively working together, not against one another. Indeed, there are strengths in numbers. May we each embrace our appreciation for one another and cultivate and nurture our professional relationships as examples of honesty, integrity, commitment and passion, inspiration, and empowerment to those we serve. I humbly and gently remind each of you, along with myself, to take time for personal and professional self-care as and when required. Personal awareness and reflection is the doorway to effective and efficient leadership. This perspective and set mindset reminds us not to allow our egos to take the lead, but let our professional integrity be the lighthouse which illuminates each and every decision that affects each resident of Northwest Territories. Let us not lead with selfish intent and motivation, but rather let us lead with greater good for one another and those whom we serve, always and forever as the forefront of the positions we have been gifted as members of the 18th Assembly. In closing, I'd like to quote Maya Angelou. I have learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Member statement. Member Ike Goodden and the member Satu.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and welcome back, colleagues. Mr. Speaker, political development for economic sustainability. This process paves the way for investment certainty and create a climate for economic growth and an economy that is culturally appropriate. Mr. Speaker, allow us to reflect and review the indicator dates leading to support this process since November 2017, inception of the red alert issued by our Premier MacLeod. Mr. Speaker, this summer, recognition should be given starting with June on the Mackenzie Valley Highway announcement and the Bear River Bridge. The success of the Enbridge Line 21 HDD project, federal ministers' engagement trips to the Yellowknife, Senate Committee on Aboriginal Peoples, and the continued IGC, Intergovernmental Council discussions and consultations. Mr. Speaker, drafting a framework to capture local Indigenous rights and public concerns. Mr. Speaker, designing a territorial environment that allows more transfer of decision-making authorities to a modernized, sustainable pan-territorial structure is prosperity. We truly are on the threshold of a new regime, and through collaboration by stakeholders, we can develop a model that would be for generations of economic growth. Mr. Speaker, advancing the 2014 devolution agreements is an example of our government-to-government relationships, a consortium that included resource revenue sharing. From this model will include reconciliations that addresses environmental land management, responsible resource development, and Indigenous participation. These principles, Mr. Speaker, are fundamental elements to see projects like the Enbridge Line 21 HDD and the 1987 Chevron Fort Good Hope joint venture, a first ever equity participation from a local community. Mr. Speaker, through collaboration,
Member Satu,
Mr. Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to conclude my statement.
Member Nitligatia, Nadait Asi, Amik, Animule. Member Satu.
Thank you, colleagues. Mr. Speaker, through collaboration, a new framework from devolution and Section 35 principle creates a new foundation for rules of engagement to political and sustainable economic development, progress through partnerships, and I thank the leadership of the Satu region for participating in the recent IGC Economic Conference in Inuvik. Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Member statement. Member Ike Goodden and the member Mackenzie Delta.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in February of this year, I spoke in this House about the Willow River Bridge project, which would include an all-weather road. The Minister of Infrastructure and I agreed that the community of Acknowledgements, working with his department, had already done a great deal to advance this project. From environmental impact screening and a development of road plans to the launch of a community-based working group, Northerners have been hard at work to make this dream a reality. Right now, without a bridge, where all-weather road access to this part of the foothills of the Richardson Mountains is limited to a few months in the fall and winter, when a bridge can be built out of logs for ATVs and snowmobiles and later by ice roads. This means no reliable access to traditional trails, limited access to gravel resources, and missed opportunities for economic development, recreation, and tourism. But if we work together, Mr. Speaker, it doesn't have to be like this. This project has been in the works for a long time, and that N.W.T has been a strong partner so far. Continued commitment from the government will mean the realization of long-standing aspirations for the community. The planning studies have been completed. The proper permits are active for the next few years. Mr. Speaker, we know what we need to do going forward. Our first priority is to fund the installation of the Willow River Bridge. That's where we need the N.W.T support to come in. Back in February, the Minister spoke of applications to the first come, first served CAP funding, as well as potential new opportunities from federal infrastructure. I'll have questions about the department's progress on these funding matters at the appropriate time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Member statement, Nick, good day, the member Tuna de Holiday.
Merci, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to start this sitting off by highlighting some of the much-needed infrastructure that has been completed within the riding of Tuneda-Willowday. Mr. Speaker, over the past number of months, my riding has seen the completion of some major capital projects. For example, we have seen the completion of Highway 6, which is a 90-kilometer highway that leads into Fort Resolution. This project has been a long time coming, Mr. Speaker. Back in 2007, it was one of the first things I pushed for after being elected. Mr. Speaker, today we have a brand new highway that is fully chip sealed. While there are some spots that continue to be problematic, without a complete realignment of that highway, the area will likely remain that way. However, as long as the work to repair these spots is completed by local workers, and the Department of Infrastructure continues to work with local people that are knowledgeable on that highway, I'm sure constituents will be pleased. This project has employed many local people. Mr. Speaker, we also opened a brand new health center in Fort Resolution, which is 1.5 times bigger than the old health center, and that too was built by mostly local people. Of course, there are some expertise that had to be brought into the community, which filled the gaps where local expertise wasn't available. This health center, Mr. Speaker, has allowed all health and social services functions to be brought under one roof, which includes home care, family services, general health services, and social services. There is a lot of work performed by many local organizations that help move this project to completion. I spent many hours talking to local leaders on this project. Moreover, Mr. Speaker, at the end of last month, the community of Tlutsalke was able to reopen the Tlutsalke Deninu School as a brand new school. The entire school was rebuilt from the foundation up. In fact, there was work done under the foundation. So many residents of Tlutsalke have a brand new school in their community. Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank the government for the work they've done on this project. Mr. Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to conclude my statement.
Merci. Member Nada Danhe Karian Amik Animule. Member Huntinik Agin on Nadant Member Tuna de Holiday.
Mr. Speaker, however, there is more work to be done in capital infrastructure in Tuneda-Willowday riding. As we move through this sitting, I will be asking about the much-needed projects on behalf of the constituents of Tuneda-Willowday. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Member statement. Member Ike Godan and the member Nanakput.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Marine Transportation Service provides essential delivery of goods, fuel, and services to the Nunavut communities that rely on annually. A barge was expected to reach Paulatuk around August 12th, but residents report that the barge and their goods did not arrive. Subsequently, the barge deliveries were cancelled due to the ice conditions in the Beaufort Sea. MTS issues go well beyond the impacts of our changing climate. This year, failure to deliver goods by barge will have a very negative social and economic impact on Nunavut residents, businesses. Mr. Speaker, purchased vehicles and construction materials are stuck in Nunavut. We don't know when these goods will be delivered. We wonder whose houses won't get built this year. The phones are ringing day and night about the lost business and frustration of customers who ordered the freight. Mr. Speaker, I think that they deserve an honest answer. For example, what will the minister say to the people who will be out of work because of building materials that didn't make it in? One contractor had 8 guys on the job and had to scale back already because they're running out of material. This means that 4 families likely won't have a home this year. Mr. Speaker, action needs to be taken to move as much freight to the coastal communities as possible, but I also want action taken so that barge deliveries are reliable in the future. They should never have to wait 2 years for their goods. With the new Inuvik-Tuk Highway, MTS can utilize Tuktoyaktuk as a port and staging location for its northern service to coastal communities. With the window of operating season so short in the Arctic, we need to seriously look at Tuktoyaktuk as a logistical site for supplying the north. Excuse me, Mr. Speaker, the issue of barge cancellation began in Alberta, where the petroleum products were purchased where inspections failed in the Northwest Territories, halfway down the Mackenzie River. Mr. Speaker, moving forward, the ministers should take a hard look at MTS operations and make a plan that will serve the people of the territory. That is what governments are meant to do. The human costs of this year's failure of service seem to be overlooked. The N.W.T's mandate is to improve the quality of life of our residents. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Member statements. Member Hay River North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's been just over 3 years since the members of this 18th Assembly were elected. With less than a year remaining in this term, I find myself reminiscing, and that's brought up a lot of mixed feelings. I wanted to become an MLA to effect real change, and while I've been able to contribute and get a few things done here and there, I have to admit that I'm disappointed with where we are now compared to where we were when we all took office. There's issues that I bring up with the ministers in their offices, with the departments, in the committee meetings, and on the floor of this House, year after year after year, and unfortunately, I have to bring them up again this sitting because they haven't been adequately addressed, if they've been addressed at all. I'm disappointed that I constantly have to reassure my constituents that I'm still working on the issues that they bring me over and over again. And frankly, it's not that reassuring that I continue to work on the same issues year after year without any discernible progress. While I can't speak for the members on this side of the House, I wager that nearly every one of them has the same opinion. Many of us share the frustration that we hear from the public every single day. Like I said, assessing our situation has brought up mixed feelings, Mr. Speaker. While I'm disappointed, I'm also optimistic and excited because we still have a year left to get things done. I can't let this job get me down, Mr. Speaker. The privilege of being an MLA comes with too much responsibility. I've learned a lot in the past 3 years, and I truly believe that if we listen to each other and work together, we can make the most of our final year and tackle some of these ongoing problems. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to keep fighting for improved healthcare and mental health services in Hay River, for adequate funding for schools across the territory, for a more diversified economy and better support for small businesses, for the government to live up to its funding agreement with communities, and for solutions to all the other ongoing problems. And I'm going to do my best to light a fire under this cabinet so that when I reminisce a year from now, I'll be proud of what this Assembly accomplished. It's going to be a challenge, but I'm confident that we can do it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Member statements. Member statements. Returns to oral questions. Minister of Lands.
Mr. Speaker, I have a return to oral question asked by the member for Frame Lake on February 15th, 2018, regarding any potential federal indemnification of Terra X at the ptarmigan mine site. The Government of Canada has confirmed to N.W.T officials that no form of indemnity has been offered to Terra X related to the ptarmigan mine site. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Returns to oral questions. Returns to oral questions. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Member for Cam Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I'd like to recognize a longtime friend of mine, Mr. Michael Beauchamp, who joins us today as a visitor in the gallery. Thank you.
Merci. Recognition of visitors in gallery. Recognition of visitors in gallery. Acknowledgements. Acknowledgements. Oral questions. Oral questions. Member for N.W.T.
Kuyunani, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, earlier I spoke about MTS and the barge deliveries to the northern part of the territory. My questions are for the Minister of Infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, my first question to the Minister is what commitments are in place to ensure that coastal communities in N.W.T. cost of living doesn't rise from this error? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, this isn't an error. This is a situation that happened because of unfortunate ice that came down. But I've been on TV, I've been interviewed a number of times around this issue. I've reassured the public through the media that the Government of the Northwest Territories is committed to arranging and covering the cost of the airlift of goods to the communities. In particular, we want to get in the fuel. We have an RFP that's closing today on airlift to the communities. That's our number one priority, even though there's no immediate danger of a fuel shortage within the communities. Once that is completed, we are also at the same time looking at all the commodities on a commodity by commodity basis and a community by community basis, but the community of Paulituck will be the first to be addressed through that, and we are going to be looking at it on a customer basis, and as of today our staff and our ADM is flown in to meet with the community of Paulituck. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Nakita Deakasi, member in N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't think there was any ice on August 12th when the first delivery, but I appreciate the department's effort to go and explain to the community of what's going on. I think that's very essential and important for something like this. Mr. Speaker, the cancellation happened last week. We'd like to think that the department would move faster on an issue like this for larger centres. This means the department will consider some store items non-essential that are delivered to Paulituck, Mr. Speaker, on this airlift. Store shelves and business shelves may likely remain empty throughout the year. Mr. Speaker, why is the request for proposals for shipping goods only closing today? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I've said, the RFP is closing today for the airlift. One of the things that we want to make sure is that we wanted to make sure the airline companies had enough time to make sure this was a feasible, fair process for them to bid on it. We don't want it to be a rush thing and cause us more problems down the road. So that RFP is closing today. I suspect the fuel delivery will start and commence as early as next week. There's a number of things that have to be put into place when we do this around the logistics things. We have to transfer freight off the barges to our storage facility in Inuvik. We have to repack containers so they're suitable for air transportation. We got to organize loading and unloading of aircraft in the communities. We've got to prepare staging areas. So there's a number of things that we have to do this air resupply program. And hopefully it's going to commence, as I said, as early as next week. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, Tada Deakasi, member in N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the response from the Minister that they're starting to move on this issue. Mr. Speaker, the Minister is also a businessman. I would like him to put himself in the place of businesses that will lose out on a whole year in place where there are no roads paying off goods that they cannot receive. Mr. Speaker, can the customers who lost out on the business and harvesting opportunities from this cancellation get compensated by the Government of Northwest Territories? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Minister of Infrastructure.
Mr. Speaker, yes, in my previous life I was a businessman, and if I lived in the high Arctic, I'd realize there's some substantial risk to getting my freight in, just because of the conditions that these people live in and the challenges of getting that there. Cargo is offered and shipped with no guarantee of delivery. People know that when they sign their bill of lading. The turbine conditions clearly lay that out. There's also insurance available to third-party customers to ensure they carry insurance on their cargo in case it's damaged. But we've went out of our way as a government. That's one of the reasons we've purchased this MTS, was to bring stability to this, because I've said publicly, and I'll say it in this House, if this was a private company that owned this, they would phone you and say, do you have cargo on your freight? Yes, let's deal with that. Where do you want, and if you don't, where do you want your stuff parked till next year? We're trying to make the best we can in this situation, look after the residents. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, Nundere Kasi member Nanakput.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's, for someone who's struggling up north, with these issues right now that they face, Mr. Speaker, I know MTS is owned by the government, but they need to run it like a business, not like government. Mr. Speaker, complaints all around across the territory, likely even MTS employees say that, the responses are slow and very rare, and if any at all. Mr. Speaker, earlier I spoke about using Tuktoyaktuk as a site and how important it is to separate the southern part of the territory and the northern part of the territory. Mr. Speaker, there is a hub in Hay River, but there's also a hub in Tuktoyaktuk which serves the Arctic Ocean. Mr. Speaker, will the department commit to utilizing Tuktoyaktuk as a logistical point for MTS delivery to Nunavut communities in 2019 and into the future for better productive service? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The short answer is no. We're not going to be looking at Tuk in the short term, because Hay River is the most intermodal northern connection to the whole continental supply chain. That's where the majority of the fuel comes. That's the majority of our freight. And at this point in time right now, we're still going to use Hay River. Tuktoyaktuk could be an advantage at some point. I've said that we would continue to review our ongoing operations as we go forward. This could be also, I'm not just blaming the ice for this whole thing. There could be some lessons learned from the department and scheduling of barges and such going forward. The other point I want to make quite clear is that a lot of people have phoned me thinking we have one barge servicing these communities. We have 5 barges tugs going simultaneously, supplying all these communities up and down the river system and on the Arctic coast. We had a challenging ice season, and some members think it's kind of funny that maybe we should run it as a business. It didn't work out so good when the business ran it. They went bankrupt, and that's why the government of Northwest Territories stepped in to protect the residents of the Northwest Territories. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Hikade County, the member Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I have some questions for the Minister of Education, Culture and Employment, following up on my constituency newsletter drop earlier this year. The federal government is improving parental benefits under its employment insurance program. Parents can share the 40 total weeks in various combinations with a minimum of 5 weeks available for each parent effective June 1st, 2019. What is our government doing to coordinate N.W.T parental benefits available to our residents with this new federal initiative? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Education, Culture, Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are aware of the changes to the Canada Labour Code, and we are working diligently. Our Employment Standards Acts usually mirror the Canadian Act as well, so we're actually working at this moment to develop a plan to engage stakeholders around the changes that need to be made. And so we're looking at a couple of changes. Some of them are in the federal legislation, but some of them are our own too. We're looking at leave provisions for parents, family, caregivers, and victims of domestic violence. But we're also looking for inclusion of domestic workers, example, nannies and things. We're seeing an influx of that coming into the Northwest Territories. So we're expanding what we're doing actually, into developing a more comprehensive Workers' Employment Standards Act that meets the needs of the residents of the territories currently. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Akira Cassie, member Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, and I want to thank the Minister for that response. I did give her a heads up about these questions, and I appreciate that she's doing some work on the Employment Standards Act. And that's one of the things that does need to change to make sure that we're ready for this June 1st, 2019 deadline. Can the Minister tell us whether it's the intention of our government to actually get those changes to the Employment Standards Act done in time to meet the federal employment insurance benefits changes that are to take or come into effect on June 1st, 2019. Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are working diligently to be as timely as possible. Like I said, we're engaging, doing a stakeholder engagement that should be done by the end of this fiscal year, and then we're suspecting that we will have a legislative proposal ready to be delivered to the Standing Committee early in 2019. So we are trying to get it done as soon as possible. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Member Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I appreciate that we're all working under some timelines here with this, but if we don't get an LP until early next year, I'm worried that this is not going to happen in time for June 1st, 2019. But I want to move on to the last areas I understand that may need some changes with regard to coordination of our parental benefits with the new federal program changes will be in the area of collective agreements. Changes to collective agreements may also need to be needed to fully protect the position or job until an employee returns from parental leave. Can the Minister explain what steps our government is taking to change collective agreements in light of the new federal employment insurance changes in parental benefits? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My understanding is that negotiations are currently underway, so therefore it would not be appropriate to discuss them on the floor of this House at this moment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Member Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I thank the Minister for that. There are negotiations going on, but it takes two to tango. And I'm sure if our government were to come to the table and with an offer to deal with this even in advance of the overall package, that would probably be much appreciated. I'd like to know, though, how will the Minister and our government as a whole communicate these changes in parental benefits under our jurisdiction to the public? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's really important, actually, when we make changes to the Employment Standards Act that the public is notified of them. They impact not only they impact everyone, workers and employers together. So we are committed that we will do a full communications layout. We will be putting ads in the newspaper to engage employers, stakeholders in the consultation process. We'll be posting it on our Facebook, on our website, and once the changes are made, if changes are made, then we will actually be doing the same again, posting them in the newspaper, trying to engage them as much as possible. And I would appreciate if MLAs are willing to help as well by posting them on their sites as well. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, the member Nehende.
Mr. Speaker, today my questions are for the Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, I've been a number of constituents of government employees have come to me about concern with special leave. In my past experience working for the government, I understood it was for, death, marriage, weather, and mechanical issues. Unfortunately, there seems to be some confusion about how it's implemented. So, Mr. Speaker, does the department have a policy that supervisors can use to help them implement special leave? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, situations that qualify for extensive special leave provisions in the collective agreements, there's no additional government policy on administering special leave. We pay our managers to manage. There is some discretion that they should be able to use. So there are no additional. There's no additional policy on special leave. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, member Nehende.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for that answer. And I agree that we hire managers to manage, but sometimes we need to have some clarity on how this is implemented. So can the Minister advise us if these supervisors are trained on how to implement special leave? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, excuse me. Questions regarding the application of special leave are covered with supervisors during the Labour Relations training sessions, and any supervisor can contact their human resource client service manager for advice if they receive a request to access special leave. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Tada Council Member Nehende.
Minister, for that answer, and at least we have some process to it, and I appreciate that. Mr. Speaker, in the high Arctic or in the north, we do have problems with like mechanical. Does this be considered special leave? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey, Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, employees can be eligible for up to 5 days of special leave with pay where special circumstances prevent the employee from reporting to work. A list of examples is provided within the collective agreement, but that list is not exhaustive. Each situation must be assessed on its facts to determine whether or not the employee is eligible. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Nundere Council Member Nehende.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I appreciate the answer from the Minister. Can the Minister please advise if there's, so should a manager implement it and say no, is there an appeal process so individuals can move it up the chain? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Finance.
Speaker, special leave already exists to address various circumstances. The managers, as I said in responding to question number 1, was the managers are paid to manage and they need some discretions to have at their disposal. As far as the appeal process goes, I'm sure they can appeal to higher up if they feel that they've not been fairly dealt with. Sometimes they go as high as the MLAs in the Minister's office, so they do have people that they can talk to if they feel that they've been unfairly treated. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Oral question, Canada Member Kamlik.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. At this point in the life of the 18th Assembly, we ought to be able to see clear results from the success of the mandate based on the work of the Executive Council. Yet our economic and social realities are far from ideal. The mandate of the 18th Assembly was designed to address these issues, and yet little more than a third of total mandate commitments are substantially completed. Though the Premier calls this good progress, many of my honourable friends on this side of the House would disagree. Can the Premier explain why so little progress has been made on implementing the mandate of this government? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would have hoped the honourable member would have been listening intently when I delivered my sessional statement, where I said we made substantial progress. In the statement, and I'll repeat it for the member, I said that 103 commitments have been totally fulfilled. We have 127 commitments in progress, and we expect to have them all addressed by the end of the 18th Assembly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Council Member Kamlik.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I did listen intently to the Honourable Premier. In fact, I changed my question to incorporate his good progress remarks. Mr. Speaker, my numbers were the numbers that we gleaned from business planning was 37%. I did the math of the Premier's numbers, around 44%. Does the Premier truly believe he can accomplish more than 50% of the mandate commitments in 1 year? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, we've reviewed them. We reviewed them this morning, and they're well in progress, and many of them are ongoing commitments, so I fully expect that the majority, if not all of them, will be done by the end of this term. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Council Member Kamlik.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And according to our processes here, what we learned in business plan stays in business plan. So I'm not allowed to provide much detail, but I know for a fact that some of these mandate commitments are shifting, changing, and we have had good indication that some of them will be abandoned. Can the Premier speak to that? If he's now saying they're all going to be complete, are his ministers on the same page, or is the Premier providing new direction to his cabinet at this point in time? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government has been fully transparent in everything that we've done. We've tabled 3 reports, including the 2016-17 annual report on March the 3rd, and 2 progress reports in June and September. We also will be tabling another annual report for the 2018-19 fiscal year after March 31, 2019, as well as a final report on the government of Northwest Territories' progress on the mandate before the end of the term of the 18th Legislative Assembly. So not only the members on that side, but everybody in Northwest Territories can see for themselves the amount of work that this government has done and how much we've accomplished. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question. Member Kamlik.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Obviously, from the statistics I quoted, we are not in the clear for returning to the times of prosperity before the Great Recession. The mandate, even if I agreed with the Premier that the mandate was well along to being completed, things don't seem to be changing. So based on their assessments and their analysis and all the work they've done in advancing this mandate, when will conditions start to improve in the everyday lives of Northerners and for our economy? Thank you.
Merci. The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't know if the member is flipping or flopping. In November of last year, he criticized me heavily, not only in this House, but in the media, about issuing a red alert where he felt I was being too negative about the state of our economy. Today, he says that I'm leading people to believe that the future is too rosy. Well, I mean, the reality is our economy has gone through a tough time, is going through a tough time, and we're working very hard to make it improve. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, Canada, Member Yellowknife Centre.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my questions are for the Minister of Health and Social Services about the day program for seniors in Yellowknife. So to recap briefly, Avens ran the program until it closed about a year ago, and then the department advertised for a new service provider in the winter but had no success finding one. Then the department advertised again over the summer. So my question is, what response did the minister get to the second call for interest in running the program? Merci.
Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is an incredibly important program, and following up on the member's recommendations in one of our previous sittings, we did go out for another call on that RFP, and we reached out to potential proponents to get some additional input on what wasn't right in the first RFP. Unfortunately, we had the same exact result. There was no applications or no submissions submitted on that RFP. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, Member Yellowknife Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister. I'm wondering what the Minister's understanding is of why the nonprofit agencies aren't bidding on this opportunity. Thank you.
Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there was a variety of concerns raised by potential proponents. One of them was space. And having some dedicated space for the type of program that we were hoping to deliver. There was concerns about being able to provide, the care for higher need seniors in this program. There were some budgetary concerns, as well as some other minor administrative type concerns. But there were a number of concerns raised by potential proponents. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Member Yellowknife Centre.
Merci, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in some communities in the Decho, also in the Beaufort Delta and Betchco, an adult day program is delivered at least 3 times a week. So why is it possible to make those services available in those communities but not in Yellowknife? Merci.
Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there's a variety of different type of day programs that are provided. There's those day programs that are provided by different organizations to provide socialization and those types of things. There's also day programs that actually provide some sort of respite to family or other caregivers where family members can come out of the home. We provided a number of them. We can do it in Yellowknife. I don't think there's any reason we can't. We had pursued a model where we were seeking somebody to provide some of that higher acuity respite day program type services. We've been unsuccessful. Mr. Speaker, I did meet with the Yellowknife MLAs on September 13th to explore options that are available to us based on what we learned from these experiences. Based on that meeting, the department is actually going to move forward, and we're convening a meeting of other community stakeholders to explore other creative solutions for the delivery of a day program here in Yellowknife. We believe that there's an appetite. We just got to find the model here in Yellowknife that works for those residents that need those services. And I applaud and thank the members for meeting with me and sharing their insight and providing some direction on how to move forward. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question. Nundere Cassie, member Yellowknife Centre.
Merci, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I realize the Minister is attempting to find a solution to this impasse. The fact is, this is an urgent problem. We have both frail seniors and seniors who have dementia who need these services. Families need the respite of having their people go to these programs during the day. And so I'd like to hear a sense of urgency from the Minister, an indication of the time that it might take to get this program up and running. Thank you.
Minister of Health and Social Service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I share the members' concerns, absolutely. I mean, we've gone out for RFP on this twice. We had hoped that we would find a proponent. The model that was suggested doesn't work. I met with the MLAs. We've come up with some proposals to move forward. We are taking action. A meeting is booked for October 18th between the department and other stakeholders to actually start breaking down on some creative solutions to address this problem. So I see it as a priority. The department knows it is a priority, and we are trying to get something on the ground as quickly as we can. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, Canada, the member Hay River North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier I spoke about what we've done in the last 3 years and what we haven't done. And so I want to start off this sitting the way I start off every sitting, with questions to the Minister of ITI about the proposed fish plant in Hay River. So if the Minister wouldn't mind once again giving us an update on the status of the fish plant, including things such as the estimated dates for breaking ground, for completion, and for the start of operations. Thanks, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Minister of Industry, Tourism and Investment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't think I want to answer all four of his questions in one question, so I'm going to just answer part of it to give him another opportunity. As the member knows, we're moving forward with the design and construction of the fish plant in Hay River. We've already finished our design brief on this facility for the fish plant. We're moved into the detailed design of it now. We continue to work with the fishermen in Hay River on this whole process of the design stage of it. We've picked our lot where we want to have this in Hay River and expect construction to start in early spring. But that's all conditional on getting Infrastructure Canada's investment in Canada plan funding, food security program, but that's in its final stages. I suspect we're going to hear something shortly on the announcement of that. The member is quite aware that last year we went out, we used CanNor funding. It was kind of a unique situation. We went out and bought some of the equipment, but we took advantage of a CanNor program that was about to expire to buy some of the equipment for the new fish plant. And that's basically where we're at on the building. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, Akira Cassie, member Hay River North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That was almost the same answer I got last time, but there's a little bit of progress there, so I'll accept it. Last month, the Federal Minister of DFO established a ministerial advisory panel to look at ways to transform the Freshwater Fish Marketing Corporation. The panel will explore new governance and ownership models that support collaboration and cooperation amongst fish harvesters and involve them in decision-making. So my question to the Minister is, how will ITI support our fishermen to ensure they're fully involved in this process? Thank you.
Minister of Industry, Tourism and Investment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the member is quite right. The new minister, Jonathan Wilkinson, announced that on September 21st. He's a new minister replacing Dominique LeBlanc. And in this ministry advisory panel, we were informed of this situation. I'm looking forward to having discussions with the minister on this advisory panel going forward. But we want to look at this as a new opportunity and a new partnership opportunity with the federal government. I've stood in this House many a times of saying the challenges that the fishermen had around the Freshwater Marketing Corporation and lack of investment in the Northwest Territories over the last number of years. That's why we came out with a fishing strategy of our own, how to break away from that and have the possibility of marketing our own fish nationally and internationally. But we will continue to look at this new situation with this minister going forward and work closely with the Fishing Federation on the ideas that DFO brings to us. Now, I'm not going to go out of my way and say that they're going to bring the best idea forward. Maybe it's no better than what we presently have, but we will be apprised of the situation and work closely with the fishermen. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Oral question, Tada Cassie member Hay River North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my understanding that the chair of that ministerial advisory panel is none other than the former DM Peter Vishen, who I believe was the godfather of this commercial fishing strategy. So hopefully our fishers are well taken care of. I'd like to ask the minister, what is the status of the fish sector support officer position that we approved in last year's budget? Has this position been filled? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Industry, Tourism and Investment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do not have that information with me, and I'll have to get back to the member on that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Nundida Cassie member Hay River North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the minister for his assistance with this. You know, I give him a hard time that it's been years and we haven't really made progress on it, but I understand there's a lot of moving parts. There's the feds, which we're very dependent on. There's working with the fishermen who are busy fishing. They're not busy, you know, they don't have time for all these meetings. So I want to thank him for the work and the staff for the work they put in on this. My final question is about the governance model that is going to be used to run this proposed fish plant. When I talk to the fishermen, there's concerns about who's going to make up the board. Is it going to be representative of the fishermen? Maybe they don't want fishermen on there. Maybe they prefer to be fishing. There's a lot of issues surrounding this, and the minister's well aware of it. So what is ITI doing to ensure that there is a proper long-term governance model for the fish processing plant? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Industry, Tourism and Investment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I've said in this House, we're working closely with the fishermen in Hay River. The Tucho Fisheries put forward their own business plan. There was a number of concerns even around, I think, the last set of questions that the member gave me about the O&M of this operation. And at that time, I reassured them that at the worst case scenario, the way we've looked at it and did our numbers, that this thing would still make money. But we are going to work closely with the Tucho Fishery on how this fish plant is run and designed. It is imperative that we work closely with the fishermen because they're the ones that fish. They know what to do. I'm not a fisherman. I couldn't tell you what to do about fishing. So we need to work very closely with them. What we're there to is help support them and guide them to where they want to go. Do they want to be part of the Freshwater Marketing Corporation? Do we still want to break away and look at going to, like I said, on our own and marketing our own fish internationally and nationally? But at the end of the day, I would think every member in this House wants to see more money into the pockets of fishermen, and that's what we're trying to do.
Member Yellowknife North.
Mr. Speaker, my questions today are to the Minister of Environment and Natural Resources with regard to the 2030 N.W.T. Climate Change Strategic Framework. Mr. Speaker, as I spoke about earlier today, as I mentioned in my statement, the impacts of climate change, the severe impacts are right here and upon us. We're feeling those every day. And so I'd just like to start by asking the Minister, the strategic framework will give rise, obviously, to an action plan, which we know is still in process. But can the Minister update the members and update the residents of the territory on the process and what the next steps are to achieving the action plan? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Environment and Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in one of our Committee of Cabinet meetings that we had this morning, we had a briefing on the action plan, and that is going to be brought to Cabinet for approval. And what we will do is we're going to give that action plan to the regular members. We're also going to release it to the Indigenous governments to review. We'll be releasing it with, or sharing it with Canada and our other partners to review the draft action plan. And there'll also be a public review going on concurrently with the organizations that I just mentioned that we were going to give the plan to. But committee will have an opportunity to see that action plan before it goes any further. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Kitare, Cassie, member Yonge North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for the reply. It's very positive news to hear that in order to take next steps that the Minister and his department and Cabinet, in fact, are going to engage extensively with various stakeholders and especially with members across the floor here. I'd also like to ask the Minister, given that the strategic framework includes a major goal of reducing GHGs to 30% below 2005 levels by 2030, Mr. Speaker, can the Minister advise what range of actions could be considered to lead to this reduction? Don't need specifics, but general would be great. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Minister of Environment and Natural Resources.
Speaker, Mr. Speaker, there's a number of initiatives that we're hoping to see go through to help us with our greenhouse gas emissions. Obviously, you've heard talk of Tolston quite a bit in this House, and the announcement that the Federal Minister and Minister Schuman made this morning also indicated that there was going to be some increased funding for the Arctic Energy Alliance, because our understanding is that their funding is getting fully subscribed to and maxed out very quickly. And all of that money is used to switch homeowners and members of the public to renewable resource type heating, and that in turn will help with the greenhouse gas emissions. So there's a number of initiatives that the government is working on and people north of the territory should be working on to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by the target that the member pointed out. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Tatara, Cassie, member Yonge North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for his reply. The Minister, as noted, there was an announcement today with regard to $23 million coming from the federal government to help a number of our programs, and that is very welcome funding. The Minister also mentioned in his comments about Tolston, and so maybe I'll ask him, you know, hydropower, specifically the Tolston project, has the potential to replace significant amounts of diesel to power communities and industry. So can the Minister maybe update the progress on the Tolston discussions or the Tolston business plan for members and for residents? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Environment and Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my understanding is we're still having discussions with the federal government on Tolston. My understanding again is that they are fairly receptive to our initiative because it does fit it within their mandate as well. And I failed to point out before that some of the other projects that we're working on, such as variable speed generators in some of the communities. The one community, I think we're almost coming up to a year where we're going to do an evaluation of the effect that it's had on the amount of fuel that they use. So we're looking forward to that data. And there's a number of other projects, again, that we're talking about. But the Tolston one in particular, I know the federal government are listening to our officials and our minister, and because it does fit within their mandate, and if that were to somehow go through, that would help us a great deal in reducing our greenhouse gas emissions and providing clean energy to folks in the southern part of the Northwest Territories.
Question, Nundere, Cassie, member Yonge North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and we certainly look forward to hearing more detailed information about Tolston as we move forward with regard to that business plan. Mr. Speaker, we know that transportation is obviously a critical piece to the north. It lowers the cost of living whenever we invest in that kind of infrastructure. We are building more roads, and but roads are also going to naturally promote more vehicle and truck transportation. So one of the strategy's objectives is to reduce emissions from transportation by 10%. Can the Minister maybe give us some specifics about how this might be achieved? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Environment and Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm glad the member mentioned roads because when you have roads, if you have very good quality roads like they enjoy in the southern part of the Northwest Territories, then that obviously helps with the cost of operating your vehicle. And other things that we're doing is supporting community-based initiatives such as active transport, public transportation, lead by example in implementing fleet management for vehicles, heavy equipment, and the marine fleet. Pilot a grant program for hybrid plug-in gasoline, electric gasoline vehicles and charging stations in hydro communities in the southern part of the North Territories. Support the installation of auxiliary heaters in fleet vehicles and heavy-duty vehicles to reduce idling. So there's a number of small projects that we work on to try and get the 10% on the transportation side. And I think if anybody knows climate change, it's the Northwest Territories. We've been dealing with the effects of climate change long before the rest of the country, and I would even say the rest of the world, because we have been working a lot in the past in trying to mitigate some of the effects of the warming temperatures that we've seen in the Northwest Territories. So we're pleased that the federal government is now actually coming to the table, and they're starting to provide a lot of funding for many of the initiatives. So it's a good partnership that we've formed with them, and we look forward to more work with them in helping to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Speaker.
Oral question, County, the member Mackenzie Delta.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, follow up to my member's statement earlier today, I have a few questions for the Minister of Infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask the Minister, how has the Department advanced the Willow River Bridge project since February? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey, Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As far as advancing that project, well, that's a community initiative. We're working with the community of Acknowledgements and a member across to help them move this project along. But what I can do is update the House is when we were just at the Economic Summit in Nunavut, the Premier and myself had an opportunity to sit down with the Mayor of Acknowledgements and have a conversation about a working group that he's pulling together because this thing has sort of been all over the map with different funding groups taking the money and having different priorities on how this bridge should be advanced. So he's pulling that together, and we've had the regional director sit on that meeting to help them help facilitate how they think they need to pull some stuff together around the land use permits and moving this thing forward. And that was the latest that we had with the Mayor of Acknowledgements at this point. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Oral question, Kitadea, Cassie, member Mackenzie Delta.
Yes. Waiting for the light. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister touched on this a bit, but the community has formed a project-specific working group. This group plans to hire a dedicated project coordinator. How will the Minister and his department work with this coordinator to advance our shared goals for the Willow River Bridge project? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I said, when the Premier and I had the chance to meet with the Mayor, we've asked Mr. Clarkson, the Regional Director, to sit in on all meetings and keep us apprised of discussions. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Tatadea, Cassie, member Mackenzie Delta.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, will the Minister communicate with the Minister of MACA to see what federal funding that we can access to get this bridge in place? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey, Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, I will make sure that I follow up with the Minister of MACA in particular. There's a different bunch of funding streams that there's possible funding for the community to access through the MACA portion of the infrastructure investment we got from Canada. There's some different application-based programs I think that might possibly be available. But like I said, we'll sit down with, we'll have Mr. Clarkson sit down with the community, and because there's a lot of local things I think that we have to work out to move this project forward, but at the same time we'll look at federal opportunities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Nunavut, Cassie, member Mackenzie Delta.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, once we get this bridge in place, we'll need to turn our attention to the construction of an all-weather road. Has the department worked these needs into its planning? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I remember correctly, through our 25-year action plan for transportation, I do not believe that this has been identified as a priority going forward. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Oral question, Ikeda County, the member Tuna de Willade.
Mr. Speaker, I have questions for the Minister of the N.W.T. Housing Corporation. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask the Minister questions on the upcoming needs survey that was, I think, promised to us in the House sometime back. I'd like to ask the Minister when when will the corporation be starting their needs survey on the housing needs? Thank you.
Massey. Minister of N.W.T. Housing Corporation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I can tell the member that we have been doing a lot of work in housing since the 17th Assembly, and a lot of work has been done around policy. We've already had another survey that was done looking at our core need progress. We got a seniors study going out right now that we're hoping to get done by the end of this calendar year. That'll help us look at work that we're going to be doing in the next fiscal year. We're also going through a strategic renewal. So a lot of work's actually been done based on the previous needs survey that was completed. And based on that survey, we're going to be introducing a lot of our programs and services throughout all communities across the Northwest Territories. And then if we do need to go out and do another core needs survey, we will do that, but we actually are also building a lot of strong relationships with some of our Indigenous groups and our stakeholders, and look forward to continuing to do that work. One thing that came out of the past survey as well was the community, and that's needed in the communities, whether it's homelessness, whether it's seniors, whether it's singles, families, and I think we're going to have a really good opportunity when those community housing plans do come out. That's going to give us an idea on the work that needs to be done throughout the N.W.T. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Nakita Kasi member Tuna de Willade.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as a member, I would be prepared to abandon the whole idea of completing a need survey, because it wouldn't be comprehensive and it would be probably statistical. So I'm wondering if the minister could tell me that if there's no definite date on in this government, if there's going to be a need survey, a core need survey completed, when does the minister anticipate having these community housing plans completed? Thank you.
Minister of N.W.T. Housing Corporation.
Mr. Speaker, we actually just got a person in that position. They're going to start with, I think the community of Beshico is one of the communities that is going to be first looked at. We're hoping to get about 4 to 6 communities per year to get it done. As the member mentioned, trying to get a survey out in the last year, this assembly could be a little bit tough, and I just want to make sure that our N.W.T. housing corporations, our 5 district offices, have the support they need to implement some of the programs that I just mentioned earlier on in terms of the community housing plans, addressing core need progress, looking at our seniors, working with our stakeholders to make sure that within the life of this government, we can have a strong impact into the housing issues that we hear about, that we see when we travel to the communities, and working with members. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Tadada Kasi member Tuna de Willade.
Mr. Speaker, the in the last large core needs survey that was completed by N.W.T Housing Corporation was in 2014. I'm wondering, at that time, the corporation pulled all of the seniors' needs out and showed that as a separate need because seniors have the highest core need in housing across the territory. I'm wondering if the minister would be able to glean that information from the recent seniors housing needs survey that was completed. Thank you.
Minister of N.W.T Housing Corporation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And most recently, we just met with Avens. We talked about how do we look at the senior survey that we're doing, and the two communities that we see that are going to be in highest need are here in Yellowknife and in Hay River. But we want to make sure that we address all seniors' issues throughout the Northwest Territories. Over the last few years, we've built 5 senior complexes in various communities throughout the Northwest Territories, and we want to make sure that we address them in all of the regions. And working with Avens, as I've always said, when we work with our stakeholders and the federal government, where we are hoping to make some good announcements. We're working on trying to settle our bilateral agreements as well as other funding sources that they have. And we do know there's going to be a need for seniors' housings, long-term care facilities. We do want to help our seniors age in place, stay in their units as long as they can, and support them through the programs that we currently have. And on a case-by-case basis that come through the office for concerns from all members of this House, we do try to, the best we can, working with seniors with the situations that they're in. And I think when we get this survey completed with the seniors, we're going to see that it's needed right across the territory. But as I mentioned, I think Yellowknife and Hay River are going to be our 2 first communities that we're going to have to be looking at programs as well as possibly infrastructure. And we'll continue to work with members and continue to work with our stakeholders such as Avens, N.W.T Senior Society, and such. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For a question, Nundere member Tunade.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I was wondering if the minister could tell the House if from the work that's done with this survey, looking at past surveys and so on, if the minister has any indication whether or not the core need across the Northwest Territories has gone up since 2014, has gone down, or has remained fairly level. Thank you.
Massey. Minister of N.W.T Housing Corporation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Progress has been made in meeting that commitment that was previously made last fall to assist 250 households in core need per year. There's various programs. I could probably take the rest of the time on the clock to announce it. I am willing to share this information with committee. I'm getting able to go ahead. Totally, there's been about 646, not an exhaustive list of core needs actions. I did mention some of them earlier. We have looked at public housing tenants and getting them off their arrears to address it. 37 senior households, aging in place retrofits. We also have rent supplement participants, but I am willing to share this information with committee to let them know what the N.W.T Housing Corporations, our district offices have done to address this. It is a very exhaustive list, and I would be willing to list out line item by line item, but I will share it with all members to show that we are addressing the core need here in the Northwest Territories, and all the projects and programs that we're going to continue to do this year is going to continue to address the core need and have an impact. So I see I'm asked to shut it down. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. I foresee a written question coming up. So, oral question. County, the member Frame Lake.
See, Monsieur le Président, that's a tough act to follow. I want to ask a question, if I may, of the Minister of Infrastructure. Most of us, or some of us, attended the announcement in the Great Hall this morning about $23 million under the of federal investment under the Low Carbon Economy Leadership Fund. But when I check that figure against what our allocation is supposed to be on the Environment and Climate Change Canada website, our allocation is actually supposed to be $31.225 million. So there seems to be $8 million missing here somehow. So can the Minister of Infrastructure explain to the House what's happening? Thanks, Mr. Chair, or Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good eye on the member. This is true. The $8 billion shortfall is for one of our six items that we submitted under the Low Carbon Economy Leadership Fund, and the federal government is trying to get some more clarity around it before they actually give us the funding for that application. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Cassie, member Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to thank the Minister for that. Of course, he knows I'm going to follow up on this. What's going on? What did we actually propose, and what seems to be the problem here? Can the Minister share that kind of information with us in the House? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will get that information and provide it to the member to exactly what the application was and what the situation is for them asking for more information. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, Cassie, member Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Of course, I would urge that the Minister get that to us sooner than later. In the announcement this morning, there was some money for public housing. Can the Minister tell us what the amount was for the retrofits on public housing? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The federal contribution towards public housing is $4 million. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, Cassie, member Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. That's an interesting figure. I know that when there was an announcement in Nunavut about their low carbon economy leadership funding, Nunavut is devoting $12 million to public housing retrofits. Why are we only asking for $4 million? Can the Minister explain this? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would suspect that we did a cross-department ask on these funds and applications, but I can only go out on a limb and say, start with Nunavut's public housing needs are a lot different than the ones in the Northwest Territories. But I suspect that when we did this cross-jurisdictional department ask on the support of this funding, that was probably the ask put forward that we landed on with all the departments. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, the member Nahende.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to follow up with some questions to the Housing Minister. When we're talking about the senior housing strategy or survey that's gone out, it's very specific to Yellowknife and Hay River. So when will the Minister be looking at to expand it into the other communities? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of N.W.T. Housing Corporation.
Mr. Speaker, and just to clarify, this is a senior survey right across the Northwest Territories. What I want to clarify is that out of that survey, when we do get it, and we will share it with committee and share it with the public, is that it's going to show that Yellowknife and it's going to show that Hay River are in the most needs for services in terms of what we're providing, and that's just a reality of the situation that we are in the territory. But it is a survey that's going to be right across the Northwest Territories, and we're getting input from all of our stakeholders on this. And the community plans that I mentioned earlier is also going to address some of the priorities that are needed in each of the communities across the Northwest Territories. And like I said, whether it's going to be seniors, whether it's going to be the homelessness, singles, families, and we're going to try to do the best that we can to address all those concerns over the years to come. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Question, the Council Member Nahende.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the answer from the Minister. I guess my big concern is I've seen the survey, and it's very tailor-made to Yellowknife and Hay River for the seniors. Will there be a new survey, or is this the survey that we're using to come up with answers? Because right now, when I sent it out to my constituents, that was their questions. This is Yellowknife or Hay River issue. It doesn't help us. So will be that, was that the survey, or are we coming up with a new one? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of N.W.T. Housing Corporation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I do know that I mentioned that it was a survey, and it's working with our stakeholders to complete more like a study, I guess I have to say, to see what is our needs across the Northwest Territories. And I only said it was a survey because we're going out and consulting. Our district offices are working with their community members to develop this study that's going to say what is needed for seniors across the Northwest Territories in years to come. And as I mentioned, that Hay River, Yellowknife is going to probably show that they're the priority, and they're going to be needing a lot of senior support in housing in years to come. Mind you that we did, over the last few years, constructed senior units and complexes in Acknowledgements, Fort Liard, Y.E.L.L.K.N.I.F E, Fort Good Hope, and we're currently working on the ones in Fort Good Hope and Fort McPherson. Hopefully those will be completed this year, and we can get seniors moving into them and helping them out. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Question, Council Member Nahende.
Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the answer, and I agree that the work is being done, but we're also looking at the small communities. I know Yellowknife and Hay River are going to see a big number, but I go into my communities, every community that I represent, seniors is an issue, and I can tell you some of the seniors have been very explicit in what they say about moving out of their community. And I can't say those words in this house here, but so it's great to hear we're looking at Yellowknife and Hay River, but how are we going to look at the smaller communities? Because can we look at small complexes for the smaller communities, the small ones, like the Jean Marie's, the Wrigley's, and the Hannibutes, and some of the K's of this world? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of N.W.T. Housing Corporation.
Thank you, Speaker. And I know I mentioned Yellowknife and Hay River, but that's probably going to be the biggest needs moving forward. We do have a lot of major seniors housing initiatives, such as seniors aging in place retrofits, ongoing seniors marketing and promoting campaigns, transfer of family homes. And we're looking at intergenerational when we look at doing those. We're going to do LHO repairs in some of the small communities, as well as I mentioned earlier, we're going to have these community housing plans. And as we develop those, the Jean Marie's, the small communities will be able to identify whether it's seniors that are going to be a priority, or singles, or homelessness, and we're going to put those out over the years to come. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Or a question, Council Member Nahende.
Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the answer from the Minister. He talks about these community plans and that, and he explained it. But if we're doing 5 or 6 a year, and just using 6 as a maxed out, that's going to be over 5 years. So has the Minister looking at that? That's over 2 assemblies, this one and the next one. So has the Minister looked at, or asked the department to look at speeding up these community plans a little bit quicker? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of N.W.T. Housing Corporation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And we're just early on into the community housing plans. The good thing about this is that as soon as we get a community housing plan done in one of the communities, and it can offer as a template for similar communities of certain sizes, and working with our leadership, working with our stakeholders. It might expedite the process of getting more communities done per year, and obviously it will help us as a government and as a N.W.T. Housing Corp with our planning of where we put the investments, the infrastructure investments, and where we put the programs and what programs need more support for each community. So I think once we get our first few done, it might serve as a template for communities right across the territory and might speed up the expedite the process. And I am making sure that our district offices, as well as the N.W.T. Housing Corporation, is on top of this to address it. And it's something new, and it's going to be groundbreaking. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Time for oral question has expired. Written questions. Written questions. Returns to written questions. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, I have a return to written question 11-18-3 asked by the member for Frame Lake to the Minister responsible for the N.W.T. Power Corporation on May 30th, 2018 regarding the Tulson Hydroelectric Expansion Project. Mr. Speaker, I have a return to written question 12-18-3 asked by the member for Frame Lake on June 1st, 2018 to the Minister of Industry, Tourism and Investment regarding Ekati mine layoffs. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Returns to written questions. Returns to written questions. Replies to Commissioner's opening address. Replies to Commissioner's opening address. Petitions. Petitions. Reports of Standing Special Committee. Reports of Standing Special Committee. Reports on Committee on the Review of Bills. Member for Nahende.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wish to report to the Assembly that the Standing Committee on Social Development has reviewed Bill 13, an act to amend the Securities Act, Bill 14, Miscellaneous Statute Law Amendment Act 2018, Bill 15, Document Formalization Services and Notice Reform Statute Law Amendment Act, and Bill 16, an act to amend the Social Assistance Act, and Bill 17, an act to amend the Student Financial Assistance Act. Mr. Speaker, the committee wishes to report that 13, 15, 16, and 17 are ready for consideration in the Committee of the Whole, and that Bill 14 is ready for consideration in the whole in the Committee of the Whole as amended and reprinted. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Reports on Committee on the Review of Bills. Member for Cam Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to report to the Assembly that the Standing Committee on Government Operations has reviewed Bill 7, Chartered Professional Accountants Act. Bill 7 is part of a national effort to unify 3 separate organizations responsible for regulating and managing professionals authorized in Canada to work as professional accountants. The National Unification Framework created a new national body, the Chartered Professional Accountants of Canada, or CPA Canada. The purpose of the bill is to merge the 3 professional accounting bodies currently operating in the Northwest Territories and Nunavut, following the lead of the 3 related national accounting bodies that merged in 2013. Bill 7 will repeal 3 existing N.W.T. statutes and replace them with a single new Chartered Professional Accountants Act. This bill is being coordinated with legislation in Nunavut to allow members of the newly merged body, the Chartered Professional Accountants of Northwest Territories Nunavut, known as CPA N.W.T. NU, to operate as one in both territories. Reporting of this bill was deferred during our last May sitting, when our law clerk brought to the attention of the committee a concern shared by the law clerk in Nunavut that Clause 2 of Bill 7 raises a significant legal matter. As drafted, the bill
Member Cam Lake, you just need to report to the House. You don't have to read in detail.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Public clause-by-clause review of the bill took place yesterday evening on October 10th, 2018. With that, Mr. Speaker, the committee wishes to report that Bill 7 is now ready for consideration in Committee of the Whole as amended and reprinted. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Reports of Committee on the Review of Bills. Member for Cam Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, your committee would like to report on consideration of Bill 8, Emergency Management Act. Bill 8 received second reading in the Legislative Assembly on March 15, 2018. It was referred to the Standing Committee on Government Operations for review. I would like to advise the House that the committee wishes to extend our review of the bill with the intention of conducting a clause-by-clause review on Monday, October 15th, and reporting back to the House on or before October 15th, 2018. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, in accordance with Rule 75, brackets 1, brackets C of the Rules of the Legislative Assembly of the Northwest Territories, I move seconded by the Honourable Member for Hay River North that the review period for Bill 8 be extended to October 26, 2018. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. The motion's in order. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion carried. The review period will be extended to October 26, 2018. Reports the Committee on the Review of Bills. Member for Kamloops.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, your committee would like to report its consideration of Bill 18, Cities, Towns and Villages Act. Bill 18 received second reading in the Legislative Assembly on May 29, 2018, and was referred to the Standing Committee on Government Operations for review. Based on our public consultations and submissions received, I would like to advise the House of the committee's wish to extend our review of the bill with the intention of reporting back to the House on or before October 26, 2018. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, in accordance with Rule 75, brackets 1, brackets C, I move, seconded by the Honourable Member for Hay River North, that the review period for Bill 18 be extended to October 26, 2018. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. The motion's in order. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion carried. The review period will be extended to October 26, 2018. Reports of Committee on the Review of Bills. Member for Kamloops.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, your committee would like to report on its consideration of Bill 20, the Ombudsperson Act. Bill 20 received second reading in the Legislative Assembly on June 1, 2018, and was referred to the Standing Committee on Government Operations for review. Based on several public consultations and submissions received, I'd like to advise the House of the committee's wish to extend our review of the bill with the intention of reporting back to the House on or before October 26, 2018. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, in accordance with Rule 75, brackets 1, brackets C, I move, seconded by the Honourable Member for Hay River North, that the review period for Bill 20 be extended to October 26, 2018. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. The motion's in order. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion carried. Review period will be extended to October 26, 2018. Reports on Committee on the Review of Bills. Reports on Committee on the Review of Bills. Tabling of documents. Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the following 7 documents entitled Capital Estimates 2019-2020, Government of the Northwest Territories Response to Committee Report 6-18, bracket 3, Report on the Review of the 2017 Auditor Report on Climate Change, Government of the Northwest Territories Response to Committee Report 8-18, bracket 3, Report on the Review of the 2016-17 Public Accounts, Interim Public Accounts for year ended March 31st, 2018, Follow-up Letter for Oral Question 209-18, bracket 3, Targets for Summer Student and Internship Employment Opportunities, Follow-up Letter for Oral Question 262-18, bracket 3, Summer Employment Opportunities for Post-Secondary Students, and Follow-up Letter for Oral Question 331-18, bracket 3, Fire Prevention in the Mackenzie Delta. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Tabling of documents. Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the following document entitled Government of the Northwest Territories Response to Committee Report 7-18 brackets 3, Report on Review of Bill 6, Cannabis Legalization and Regulation Implementation Act, and Follow-up Letter for Oral Question 340-18 brackets 3, South Mackenzie Correctional Center Therapeutic Model. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Tabling of documents. Minister of Health and Social Service.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the following 5 documents entitled Government of the Northwest Territories Response to Motion 16-18 brackets 3, Smoking of Vehicles with Minors Present. Follow-up letter to oral question 309-18 bracket 3, Sigachik Health Centre. Follow-up letter to oral question 312-18 bracket 3, Cannabis Education Plan Fund. Follow-up letter to oral question 318-18 bracket 3, Addictions Aftercare Detox Programs. And follow-up letter for oral question 352-18 bracket 3, Mental Health Care. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Tabling of documents. The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the following document entitled Letter to Prime Minister, dated June 13, 2018, regarding protection of porcupine caribou herd. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Tabling of documents. Minister of Industry, Tourism and Investment.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the following 4 documents entitled Follow-up letter for oral question 177-18 bracket 3, Knowledge Economy in the N.W.T. Follow-up letter for oral question 263-18 bracket 3 and oral question 313-18 bracket 3, Dredging the Portahay River. Follow-up letter for oral question 296-18 bracket 3, Ingram Trail Maintenance Schedule, and follow-up letter to oral question 353-18 bracket 3, Sigachik Ferry Landing. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Tabling of documents. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to table a response to the petition provided by the Minister of Health and Social Services in response to a petition tabled by the member for Cam Lake on March 29, 2018. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Tabling of documents. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I wish to table the following 2 documents. The first is a press release from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, summary for policymakers of IPCC, special report on global warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius approved by governments. Second document, Mr. Speaker, is a summary for policymakers, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, special report dated October the 6th, 2018. Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Tabling of documents. Tabling of documents. Pursuant to Section 35-1 bracket 3 of the Legislative Assembly and Executive Council Act, I hereby table the 2018 review of members' compensation and benefits prepared by an independent commission to review members' compensation and benefits dated August 2018. Notices of motion. Notices of motion. Notices of motion for first reading of bills. Notices of motion, first reading of bills. Motions. Motions. First reading of bills. First reading of bills. Second reading of bills. Second reading of bills. Consideration in Committee of the Whole bills and other matters. Minister's statement 19-18 bracket 3 with member Hay River North in a chair.
Call Committee of the Whole to order. What's the wish of committee? Mr. Bolio.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I move that the chair rise and report progress. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Bolio. There's a motion to report progress. The motion is in order and non-debatable. All those in favor? All those opposed? The motion is carried. I will now rise and report progress.
May I have the report, Member Hay River North?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, your committee has been considering Minister Statement 19-18 brackets 3 and would like to report progress, and I move that the report of the Committee of the Whole be concurred with. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Do I have a seconder? Member Fortuna de Willade. Motion's in order. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion carried. Massey. Third reading of bills. Third reading of bills. Mr. Clerk, orders of the day.
Orders of the day for Friday, October 12, 2018, 10 a.m. Prayer, minister statements, member statements, return to oral questions, recognition of visitors in the gallery, acknowledgements, oral questions, return to written questions, replies to the Commissioner's opening address, petitions, report of standing and special committees, report of committees on the review of bills, tabling of documents, notices of motion for the first reading of bills, motions, first reading of bills, second reading of bills, consideration in committee of the whole of bills and other matters, Minister's Statement 19-18 bracket 3, table document 215-18 bracket 3, report of committee of the whole, third reading of bills, orders of the day.
Mr. Clerk. This House stands adjourned until Friday, October 12, 2018, 10 a.m.
Order!
You don't.